Hello, family members. I have a question. Why do biopics lie? I mean, obviously, I understand from like a narrative perspective why they might want to embellish or something like that. But why do we as consumers accept biopics that completely lie and just absolutely make stuff up? It's a very strange thing to me. So like, um, a good example of this would be the of Bohemian Rhapsody. I watched it when it came out. It was an entertaining movie, but it was very, very wrong about a lot of things. It was like, it made up an entirely confabulated story about how the band got together, and it made up an entirely fictional character to criticize like a executive guy. The Mike Myers character is just straight up not real. Like, they completely messed up the timeline of events at the end of the movie with I mean, like, why did they make it seem like Freddie was the first one to have a side project, Like, that's almost kind of disrespectful in a way. Like, now obviously he's not alive and the other bandmates are alive, and I'm sure that that's part of the reason right there, is they wanted to, you know, they probably had to, in order to get the licensing for the songs that they needed to make the movie, they had to make sure that the surviving band members were on board, and so they're not going to depict events differently than how they want it depicted. And so that's part of the reason why biopics are that way. But again, why are we okay with that? Why? It's so strange to me, like, if you want to tell a fictional story, tell a fictional story, make up a character. It could be something that's similar to, but not exactly the same as a particular person. You know, Obviously, like, say, the Elvis picture that Baz Luhrmann did. Very, 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 very stylized, right? But, also very wrong. And, I mean, I don't know. It's strange. It's so strange to me. I guess it's the same thing where we have to have like a million trillion sequels to everything um, these days. And so they're like, well, if we make a movie, a biopic about Marilyn Monroe, people will go and see it because there's some brand recognition, right? Because that's what the celebrities that get biopics made about them really end up being, brand. And so it's taking real people and making them into fictional characters. It's like real person fan fiction, but like corporate funded real person fan fiction. And it's honestly kind of infuriating when it's somebody who's passed away and has absolutely no say. For example, Blonde. Be Kind Rewind has an excellent video about Blonde and about how, basically some ghoulish men took Marilyn Monroe's image and made torture porn out of it and tainted her legacy, for their own personal benefit. And it's just like really gross. Really, really gross. I mean, obviously, if somebody's telling their own story, they're going to be somewhat of an unreliable narrator. But I don't think that, Hollywood directors are reliable narrators. You know, when it comes to historical events, anytime that they're depicted in movies, they have to be, you know, embellished or twisted, or things have to be changed. And it's just, it's such a strange thing to me, you know, like when they made the first attempt at Percy Jackson, those awful movies. Why did they change all of that source, you know, from the source material? Why is it that anytime that anything is adapted, that they make arbitrary changes? Like obviously, like say for example, the Pride and Prejudice miniseries from the 90s. There's a few tweaks here and there to the story, but they stayed very close to the plot of the actual story. You know, they had the time to do that because it was a miniseries, not a movie, but still, you know, why do they change characterizations of people when they make adaptations of things? There's always this like desire to put your own creative stamp on it, and it's just really strange to me when you're talking about somebody adapting either a real person's life, real events, or pre-existing content, you know? Like, I guess that's a function of our corporate media. You know, it's, you get these people who are creative and want to tell their own stories and to serve their own creative vision. But in order to get the funding to make the art that they'd like to make, it needs to have some sort of recognizable brand attached, right? And so then they add their own creative vision to that brand. And that can be a good thing. Like, for example, I'd say Thor Ragnarok is a really good example of how that can go right. You know, Taika Waititi did such a great job on that movie and put his own stamp on it and changed things about the source material, but in a way that was really, it made something new and exciting and fun and fresh. And that's okay when you're talking about like a comic book character who has had so many iterations. You know, I mean, there's so many different versions of any comic book character that's been around for decades, you know. X-Men, Captain America, Batman. I mean, there's iterations upon iterations upon iterations of Superman and Thor, and you know, I mean, that's just because comics are serialized like that. You know, it's hard to have one person embody an icon and have them continually have stories over decades without it getting kind of stale, you know? So, you know, maybe that original version of that character retires and someone else takes up the mantle, or their child grows up and takes it, or it's just a completely different characterization written by different writers in a, you know, alternate reality, whatever. You know, there's just different ways of iterating. And it's interesting that there are mediums like comic books where that's a good thing and that happens, and that's not such a bad aspect of it. But then to do the same thing with, you know, Lincoln or JFK or Jackie O, or, you know, people who are people, actual people. You know, like one of the reasons I was thinking about this was I was thinking about Betty Page again, because I always do. And I had mentioned in the video I made a couple of days ago about Betty Page that I never watched the biopic. Because if you really know a lot about a person and you care a lot about a person, it's very rare that there isn't going to be a biopic, or that a biopic is going to really capture them correctly. And, you know, I was going to resist the temptation to embellish or add or omit things. And with, say, a person like Betty Page, you know, who wasn't part of that, it wasn't her telling her story, it was other people telling her story. I just didn't trust that they would have, you know, her best interests at heart, you know? Like I didn't want to see how distorted her story would be. I mean, then you have biopics like Frida, you know, another video I made a few days ago, and I mentioned that biopic. Obviously, it took some creative liberties, but Selma Hayek really, really loves and respects Frida Kahlo. And so she was going as hard as she could to make sure there was an accurate depiction as much as she possibly could. I mean, as far as I can tell, the only sort of like questionable parts about it were things that she had to do to please fucking Harvey Weinstein, which that's a whole, yeah, if you want to make this movie, you got to put a lesbian sex scene in. Like, yeah, when Frida was, you know, bi or pan or fluid, whatever, it's fine. You can depict that, but, you know, the gratuitous sexy dance scene with Ashley Judd had to be there to please that man in order to get the movie made, you know? So maybe that's it. Maybe it's because movies aren't a creative vision, you know, because they have studio interference, you know, maybe that's why there's too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. And it's very rare that you're going to have a high profile project where an artist, a director, a writer, whatever, gets the opportunity to fully tell the story as they want to, you know? But I find it so unnecessary, you know? Like, and there's so many biopics out there. And you know what? There's a lot of people who deserve to have their stories told. But, like, I don't know. I just don't know why we don't tell their stories. Why we have to make it into somebody who they weren't. You know, why we have to turn them from human beings into icons, into fictionalized characters. I find it kind of sad, honestly. And, you know, I also think it's just, you know, we have an issue, let's say, in society with misinformation and distortions of the truth. And maybe part of the reason that this casual relationship between reality and what media depicts is something that we should be concerned about, you know? Like, why isn't there an expectation that if you go to a movie depicting the events of someone's life, that it's not going to tell you what actually happened in their life, you know? Even if they're really good movies, like, say, A Beautiful Mind, another great example. The way that they depicted his mental illness was just wrong. That's not how it was, you know? And it was more narratively interesting for the viewer, the way that they presented it. And that's a gorgeous movie, but is it not disrespectful to the people involved to depict the events differently than they were, you know, and then they actually occurred? Is it not harmful to show a real life man's mental illness in a way that completely incorrectly depicts how it actually occurred? You know, I mean, there is so much about mental illness that people do not understand. There's a lot of of bad information, bad tropes related to mental illness. And when you see somebody who has mental illness issues in a biopic, and you see their mental illness depicted a certain way in that biopic, it's going to make people think, okay, that's how that mental illness works. Because most people aren't going to have that particular type of mental illness, may never know anybody with that particular type of mental illness. And so, now they're always going to think that schizophrenia looks like a certain way, or, they'll watch Sybil and think that that's how dissociative identity disorder works, or, any number of things, and it's one thing when it's fiction, but it's a whole nother thing when it's a biopic, because it adds this layer of credibility to it. Like, this really happened. And when it didn't really happen, isn't that kind of harmful? So I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand why. If you wanna make a movie about a celebrity and you want it to be fictionalized, there might be some little bits that you have to add here or there. But as far as because nobody knows what happened, but there's ways that you can do it that aren't contradictory to actual reality, An example of that would be, say, Hamilton, which is obviously there's a lot of creative license taken in the way that it tells its story. For example, the people who confronted Hamilton about what happened with Mariah Reynolds it wasn't the same characters, it wasn't the same people in real life, but they only have so many people, so many speaking characters in the play. But in the room where it happened, nobody knows. That's the truth. The historical truth is that nobody knows exactly how it went down. And so the only thing that anyone can do is speculate. And so rather than depict it as through the lens of Hamilton or Jefferson, somebody who was really there, the story is told from the perspective of Aaron Burr, someone who wasn't in the room when it happened. And that allows them to speculate without stating outright, this is exactly what happened, And that way, it's not going to be in your head that it had to have happened like that historically. You know that it's not necessarily the way that it was depicted in the play, because it's Aaron Burr's meditations on what happened in the room where it happened, And there's a lot about that play that makes me crazy, but it's a play. Plays are very stylized, especially musicals are very stylized. And, I wish that they hadn't done stuff like make up the fact that about Angelica not being married yet when she met Hamilton. That wasn't necessary. There's a few gratuitous wrong details, but for the most part, it was a person who had a passion for trying to share events at least as close to or with the essence of what happened as possible. And in a very stylized medium and in a place where, they have colorblind casting. It's very clear. And that's not how biopics work. Biopics have this air of reality, I remember when I was a kid, they had that Patch Adams movie, and I was all excited because the guy's from he had a clinic in West Virginia. They didn't film a dang minute in West Virginia. And I was so disappointed. I was like, why do they do that? Why do they depict events in ways that they didn't happen, you know? And why are we okay with that? You know, fiction be fiction, nonfiction be nonfiction. That's maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but that's what I think we should expect, you know? And if somebody wants to make something that's extremely loose association, then you can do that, you know? Like, you could make, say, Baz Luhrmann could have made his movie, his Elvis movie, using Elvis music and an Elvis-like character, and it didn't have to necessarily literally be Elvis, you know? And then it's clear that this is a fictional story, not reality. But, you know, that's not the way that he went with it. You know, maybe he wouldn't have gotten the funding that he needed. I don't know. You know, hard to say. But it baffles me. At the end of the day, I am utterly baffled by the fact that we as a society are totally cool with biopics and movies about historical events being just so obviously factually wrong, and just nobody cares. Well, I mean, I guess obviously not nobody, because I'm here making a video about it, but not enough people care, obviously, for the practice to not be a common practice. So that's what I got for you today. I hope you guys have a nice day. And, you know, learn history. Bye.